A lot of action, a lot of moving parts here in the current war between Russia and Ukraine. Joined now by Mike McFaul, former U.S. Ambassador to Russia, NBC News International Affairs analyst. And Mike, I always try to make you help us understand what is going on in Putin's head. Never an easy task. But yesterday, you and I were talking about, boy, Putin has had to say some things and make some moves in the last 2 weeks that just seem, almost desperate. And then he follows it up with today, admitting this mistake on the draft. What do you make of it?
It's new, Chuck. He doesn't like to say he's wrong. He doesn't like even to say his lieutenants are wrong. And he admitted that they made mistakes. They drafted the wrong kind of people. Too many people have been gathered up. He's decided that we have to return the misfits, to paraphrase what he said today. But I think it underscores he's under a lot of pressure right now. This move tomorrow is historic, tragically historic. It is more annexation in the heart of Europe. It's clear that it's going to happen. He's annexing, the size of Portugal tomorrow to be part of the Russian Federation. And he knows that there's going to be a backlash against that. He seems pretty stressed out to me right now.
I mean, nothing seems to be going right for him. Again, you and I talked on my podcast earlier this week about, I feel like some of this started when he had his security conference with China and India and a few other countries, and he had to admit publicly that China and India weren't thrilled with what he was doing in Ukraine. He seems to be grasping here for something. What's he doing next, and how would sabotaging these pipelines actually be a good idea?
Well, I think what he's doing next, and again, I don't read his mind and we don't correspond, and so with all those caveats in place, but I think what he wants to do is he want to annex these 4 territories, seize them. He doesn't control them right now. Remember, there's fighting in 2 of them right now. But then he wants to say, all right, we're done. Let's have peace. I have my land. You're showing it right now. I've taken my territory. Let's sue for peace. And then he wants to see how the West will react to that. So I think that's his next big play. With respect to Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, I don't know. I don't want to speculate. It's very striking what NATO said today, that this is an attack on their facilities. But we haven't learned yet who they think who has done the attack. And so let's wait till we have definitive information about that before thinking about what the response might be.
I understand, but Mike, the fact that NATO would have to respond to an attack on one of its member states' infrastructure, no?
Yes, exactly. That's why I think they're being, why we're waiting to see who are they going to actually say did these attacks. I think that's a very big step for them to take.
Putin seems to think, right, the general assumption is, if he can scare the European West, and I say European West, he knows he's not going to scare the American West, but if he can somehow rattle France, rattle Germany, rattle some of these countries, but what evidence that he's going to do this? Whatever past history there was with Germany and France, it seems like Macron and Scholz are on the same page here with Biden.
Well, you're absolutely right. He's trying to scare the West. When he talks about nuclear weapons and the threat of using them, that's actually deterrence. He's saying, if you escalate, I will respond. And it's working. Let's be honest. He has deterred the West. He has deterred NATO from providing certain kinds of military systems to the Ukrainians because of that fear of escalation. So that has a very practical and I would say very clear-cut objective. The bigger issue is, can he scare the West into stop supporting Ukraine and pressuring Zelensky to sue for peace? And that we don't know yet. I am impressed by the opposite, just like you said. I'm impressed by the unity of NATO so far, not the disunity.
What do you make of the Russian Foreign Ministry basically saying, hey, we're ready to start talks on New START with the United States? I know we're a believer in constantly sort of, all right, well, We've got to have a nuclear arms agreement over here, even if we're in the midst of trying to push back at them. But should we? Is this the time to engage them or not?
Chuck, it's a tough call, but I think we should. Because I think it's in America's national security interest to have an arms control regime in place, extending the New START treaty, than to not have it in place. So you just got to think, what is our interest? And our interests are caps on their nuclear weapons, number one, and two, the ability to inspect where those weapons are, to gather intelligence about Russia's nuclear arsenal. I think that's in America's national interest, and we should have that negotiation, but we should not allow the Russians to link that negotiation to any other issue. They'd love to do that. They'd love to say linkage, right? We'll only talk to you about arms control if you do this and that and the other for us. We can't allow that kind of linkage to happen.
And one would assume if we're engaged with them on a nuclear arms treaty, at the same time they're saber rattling, right, about using a tactical nuke with Ukraine, and even Ukraine's president saying their intelligence indicates that this is a very real possibility. And given the comments that Jake Sullivan made this weekend, it certainly seems like American intelligence believes this is a very real possibility. So how do you balance that?
I think the beginning of that negotiation is to remind Mr. Putin that in January, he, with the other P5, the other nuclear powers, signed an agreement at the United Nations, lots of fanfare, saying nobody will ever use nuclear weapons. They're to deter war, not to be an instrument of war, and to make sure that he's still committed to that. And the second thing I would be doing if I worked for the Biden administration was trying to get Mr. Xi Jinping to communicate quietly exactly that same message.
Ambassador Mike McFaul, as always, sir, I learn a lot when you're on the show. So thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.